Welcome to the first MT Talk podcast, a new podcast in which we'll be having conversations about mathematics teaching. My name is Lisa.
And my name is Jay.
And I'm Elizabeth.
We're friends and former colleagues who all work in mathematics education. We've been meeting to chat regularly about math teaching for some time now, and we thought it'd be a really good idea to start sharing some of our conversations in a podcast format. In this episode, we're going to be looking at two articles from Mathematics Teaching, which is the Journal of the Association of Teachers of Mathematics. One of these articles is a classic article from MT168, published in 1999, and the other is a recent article from MT296, which was published in June of this year. So, what are the two articles? I think Jay is going to introduce the Mike Askew article.
So the Mike Askew article is called Teaching Numeracy, Will We Ever Learn? And it was written or published in September 1999. If you remember back, if you're as old as me, I've been teaching since 1996. So in those days, we had the national numeracy strategy starting sort of around that time. And numeracy sort of meant maths. And so what he does in this article is he starts with talking about the idea that you need a theory, and he says there's two theories of teaching: learning as acquisition and learning as participation. So learning as acquisition is the idea that knowledge is passed on, and participation is that they're in a community and they're learning as part of that community. And what he says is that both matter. Then he goes on to talk about some ways of looking at participation, and he says there's talk, there's different tools that teachers use, there's the norms of the classroom, and there's mathematical tasks. So that's essentially what the article's about. I suppose we'll dive into that in a bit more detail in a moment.
Great. And shall I introduce the Jane Hawkins article? So thanks. So this one is Why Purposeful Talk in Mathematics Lessons Matter. And the article looks at kind of findings and research from the NCTM's Research and Innovation Work Group, which she's done through her local maths hub. And it talks about the importance of mathematical language and the idea of oracy, which we know is a bit of a buzzword coming out of a lot of curriculum discussions of late. And it goes to a really nice example of a Year 8 class and how mathematical talk and proper dialogue is really forefronted in a maths lesson. Although I say it's a Year 8 class, it could be applicable to Key Stage 2 as well. So that was really nice. And it really focuses on how you can support those proper mathematical conversations in the classroom. So let's start out with thinking about, in either article, what stood out to you in the articles? What do we think?
So in the Mike Askew article, I think one of the things that really stood out to me was the fact that, Jay, did you say it was from 1999?
I did, yes.
And I think reading those first two ideas of learning as acquisition and learning as participation, even though that was written in 1999, it feels like exactly the same conversation that's happening today, particularly at the moment where we're getting a shift, I guess, between two governments and different philosophies of learning, where perhaps we've had quite an emphasis on knowledge rich and learning as acquisition, and we feel like we are turning into talk and oracy and moving back towards learning as participation. So it was really interesting to see those two arguments being framed like over 25 years ago that are still at the heart of what a lot of people are arguing about today.
Yeah. It's like it's not changed at all, isn't it? It's just been a conversation in maths education for such a long time.
I guess that's the title, isn't it? When will we ever learn?
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
I'm not sure that we have. I wrote at the top of this, are we still on this hamster wheel? Like, are we still going round and round and round, having these same conversations? Because I feel like, 1999, sorry, Jay, 1999, I was in high school. I was in Year 8, sorry. But I was having these conversations when I started learning to teach, and then I'm still having some of these conversations now, thinking about curriculum design. So they're really interesting. Where do we feel that we kind of lean as individuals? Are we more about acquisition, participation? Is it a mix? What do we think?
Well, I think it's really interesting sentence in this, because although he talks a lot about participation, there's an interesting sentence in here. I'll read it. He says, while some art writers argue for the need for a paradigm shift away from or even rejecting acquisition in favour of participation, I agree with Svard that the metaphors are not alternatives, both are necessary. And each provides different insights into the nature of teaching and learning. And so my view is that it's kind of a both and, but it's so when I go in to teach a lesson, there is something I want to pass on to the learners. That, you know, there is knowledge, there is a curriculum, there's something that's intended to be taught. But to think that I can just pass that on is a massive oversimplification, because learners in my classroom are participating in the community, and there's so much more they're picking up from being in the room. There is a conversation, there's stuff going on in their head I don't know. I think they're getting stuff and they might not get it. So I think it's far more complicated than it's A or B. That's my view.
So I think this reminds me a lot of Dave Hewitt's article, Arbitrary and Necessary, where Dave Hewitt talks about there are things that in maths are arbitrary. So 360 degrees in an angle, arbitrary. But then there are other things that stem from that. So if we start from the point of view that 360 degrees in a full turn, we've now got 90 degrees in a right angle. That's necessary. And so I think the acquisition is the arbitrary stuff. We have to tell the students those things. They have to acquire them. They have to acquire that there are 360 degrees in an angle. But then the necessary things, the learning to work with that and the things that stem from that, these seem to be better through participation. I can't just tell you that. There's an awareness.
And I think that part links really nicely to the Jane Hawkins article that we read about purposeful talk, because the purposeful talk feels like that is that more learning as participation sort of angle, I felt. And it was one way in which you could promote learning as participation, perhaps.
Yeah, I thought this was really interesting. So Askew talks about those 4 aspects that the teacher needs to attend to: the tasks that they work on, the talk that takes place, the tools and the classroom norms, and the tasks that Jane Hawkins is talking about in her article seem to do all of those. So it starts from a task, but it's a task to encourage talk. And the more we have the talk, the more we can work on these tools. And the talk relies on these classroom norms. So it feels that the activities that Jane Hawkins is talking about pull all of those 4 things together.
Yeah, it might be worth spending a lot of time talking about what these activities are. So in Jane's article, she's got a discussion task. And it starts off with, here's a recipe for making 4 cookies. How much of each ingredient would I need to make 8 cookies? In this recipe, you've got 200 grams of flour, 1 egg, 160 grams of butter, and 120 grams of sugar. So it's a fairly straightforward question. There's 3 different ways in that these 3 children are taking this. One is perhaps doing the standard, it's for the recipes of 4 cookies, so you divide by 4 and then you multiply up to get 8 cookies. The second person just says we double everything because it was 4, then 8. And the third person is called Chris in this article. I had to read this 2 or 3 times before I realised what he was doing. He says, I know that I need 50 times as much flour per cookie, a quarter as many eggs and cookies, 40 times as much butter, and 30 times as much sugar. So Chris's method is also correct, but he's worked out the scale fact, so the constant proportionality between the number of cookies and the quantity for each one. And they all seem really different, but they're all different ways in, and that's a real framework for the talk.
And I think she points out, doesn't she, that it's not necessarily the purpose of the talk is not about, oh, we've got to get to the right answer, particularly when they move on to think about, so they go from 4 to 8 and then they do 4 to 13 cookies, which is obviously more challenging. She really reflects that hang on, let me find the quote. The teacher's focus is on students engaging with someone else's thinking and reflecting on it. And I think that's a really powerful way of thinking about those 3 strategies, because I'm from a primary perspective, I'm still not entirely sure that I know what Chris's strategy is getting at, if I'm completely honest. So
I hadn't until just now. Yeah. and I wonder if it's to do with the difference between a scalar and a functional ratio. So I feel like the first two are trying to pull attention to that scalar ratio, the between, and then Chris has got this weird way that feels like it's dysfunctional, which is much more difficult. And I hadn't really thought about that till you two just started talking about it.
But it's interesting about there's a whole thing behind this about what are we trying to teach,
Mm.
and this is where it goes back to the whole thing about whether it's learning as acquisition or participation, because I can give you a method that works, that's a scalar method where you just work it out, a unitary method effectively, it just always works, but it might not be the most efficient method. In this situation, so you've got the first example in Jane's paper is going from 4 cookies to 8 cookies. And the next example is from 4 cookies to 13 cookies, isn't it, I think?
Mm-hmm.
And because that's so different, you might, in one situation, as a mathematician, choose a particular method, in a different situation, a different method, because you have got that awareness of what might suit in each situation. Now, what I think Jane is saying in this article is that by working through both and allowing people to talk and to compare, they are being put in a situation where their comfort method is being challenged through conversation with others and go, oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't seen that was a way in, which gives them the flexibility of thoughts that they need to do that for themselves. Whereas had you just only offered them a particular method, it may be correct, but it may be inefficient. Or alternatively, you can say, here's method A, here's method B, here's method C. And just that gets really complicated. Which method am I trying to do? So there's something around that value of talk that kind of explains why you need to participate in learning to acquire, in a way.
Yeah, I think, no. I think I follow. I think it's that, and I think it comes back to that. How are we teaching mathematics? Are we teaching mathematics as, like you say, this kind of, if you do this in every situation, it will work. So, you know, if the first method where you divide the amount for each ingredient by 4 to know how much you need for one cookie and then multiply by whatever, that is going to always work, right? That's, well, I can't think of a situation where it wouldn't work.
It will work, but it might be messy.
Yes, and that's the thing, isn't it? It's about, I think both of these are kind of getting at this idea of, are we going to teach children mathematics like, here is a set of rules, like the arbitrary stuff, like, and some of it is arbitrary, but where a strategy becomes not a fixed thing, you have to do a question like this, is mathematical talk in the way that Hawkins is describing, is that a really good way of getting into looking at different strategies? Or the flip side of that is, I'm not concerned, I think concerned's too strong a word. I was thinking about the Chris example. Like I say, I'm quite happy to explain. I would never use it because for me that mathematics is a bit beyond where I'm thinking, which is fine. Is introducing that to pupils as an option without, it doesn't suggest that it's been explicitly taught, it just suggests that it's been put out as a thing to discuss. Is there something in potentially leading to misconceptions or leading to problems if you're not explicitly teaching that strategy and just expecting pupils to talk about it?
I don't think that there's any inference in Jane saying you're not teaching these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think there's inference, and I'd expect that they would have the knowledge to know about, because essentially it's all about multiplying and dividing. But as Elizabeth said, we're switching between scaling up and scaling down to a functional relationship where we're looking essentially at the concept of proportionality, which is different. And so it's doing a different sort of maths, which is why it jars when you read it. But that is something we do every day. You know, it is not new. It just feels odd in this context. It's not maths they don't know. So I don't think it's something they haven't been taught. It's just not what they would normally do in this situation. And I don't think Jane's also saying that you wouldn't pick up on that and work on it, because later in the article she talks about this final paragraph. So let me read this out because I think it's quite interesting. So maths educators have long suggested ways in which we can support all learners to think, reason, engage in dialogue with and about mathematics. And one of the national curriculum aims is for students to reason mathematically. A theme emerges: take time to notice what your students understand, make time in lessons for students to explore and make sense of maths, and over time adapt, teach and meet students' understanding where they are. So I don't think saying you ignore what they can't do. But what you're saying is the talk allows you to get inside their heads to understand what they are and are not getting. And therefore you can then teach to that, but you meet them where they're at. And there's something about that.
It's also a nice way of reframing if you are looking at routine problems afterwards. Whose method's more efficient here? Is it, is it better here to use Chris's method? Is it better here to use, I don't know who A is, I'm going to have to go back. Is it better to use Ada's method? Is it better to use Chris's method? And presenting students with choices afterwards where one method might be easier than the other, I think would then draw that out. I think it depends on how the teacher uses it. So is it that the students find it really difficult, so just ignore it and can't explain it and we never revisit it again? Or is it that we spend time digging into it and exploring it and talking about it and then having a look at another example? So what would we use here? Whose method would be better, Ada or Chris? I've missed that B. I'm sorry. Apologies to B.
Really important point.
Interestingly, I think this is a lot of how the teaching through problem solving works in Japan, where the students are presented with a problem and they work on it, and the teacher pulls out different ways of analysing it, but they know in advance what the students are going to do and what methods they're going to pull out in what order. And sometimes the textbooks will present it like this. They'll have 3 students who have got 3 different methods, and then they'll explore the different methods and look at them afterwards and talk about who was most efficient and why.
It's really interesting. I think what you're saying there is fascinating, because you're saying this, that the teachers in Japan, they're giving these people problems to solve. The pupils have knowledge to access them, but what the teacher is doing is trying to teach this meta view of actually what is the most efficient method, what's more effective in the situation. And it's not aimless. They know where they're taking, they know what the misconceptions, they know what wrong avenues will happen in the classroom, and they're prepared for that, and they pull it together like a conductor of an orchestra and say, now we've got this, we've got this, we've got this, I expected that, and now we'll pull it together and say, let's collectively see why this works here and that works there. And that's really powerful, and that's very different from saying, I'll tell you what the best method is, without ever saying how I know it's the best method. And I think we talk a lot at the moment about experts and teachers being experts. Well, how did we get our expertise? Where did it come from? It comes from, I see expertise as being the ability to make choices and know why we're making those choices. That's what anybody's expertise, got an expertise in anything, is because they've got various options. They can pick an option and go for it. Someone who's not got an expertise, they can't make those choices. They don't know what choice to pick. And there's something about what you described, Elizabeth, from Japan, is where they are training young people to make those choices and make that
and
transparent
reflect on those choices.
Reflect on it. Yeah.
It's
really powerful.
Interesting the way they've changed the lesson structure of those lessons over time, and that post method discussion has become like the biggest and the most important part of the lesson, whether they have the 3 different solutions on the board, which I guess is what we've got to here in this article. They have those 3 solutions on the board and they'll talk about them and then pulling them together, and they said that is the really important bit of the lesson. That's the bit that's worthy of the time.
And I wonder how much we focus attention on that in the classroom on a day-to-day basis. Like, do we do that? So Askew talks about this building communities of learners, which I feel like activities as the one we've discussed kind of help to build that community. And I suppose it's interesting to think about, well, what would I take away from this? And I would love to be able to have lots of lessons that do that kind of talk and do that exploratory discussion and comparison. I'd love to do that all the time in my lessons.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I said earlier about you need to know what your intent is, and you need to know what it is. And again with those lessons in Japan, they know where they're trying to go with that. I think discussion lessons can fall really flat if the teacher isn't clear where they're taking it to, and it can just be a bit free for all. I think there needs to be an intent, which is really important. The teacher to have that. Yeah.
I think that falling, where you've talked about discussion lessons can fall quite flat. I don't know if I've paraphrased you correctly there, Jay. But there's the phrase in the Mike Askew article where he says, talk where both the teachers and pupils feel they've got something to learn from each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's touched on in Jane's article as well. So she talks about the more the students understand the purpose of the talk, the more purposeful the talk became.
Yeah. And I think that contrasts with what we sometimes see in lessons where talk is a bit manufactured, and all it really is can you sort of parrot what I've just said? Not that I'm actually interested in learning from you as a learner about how you see this, because unless I understand how you see this, I don't know how to help you. I don't know how to make sense of this on this journey with you. So it's just a really interesting phrase, isn't it? That the teacher has something to learn from the pupils' talk as well, because I can't see inside the learner's head. So I do need to hear how they're seeing it. There's a lovely example there in Mike Askew's paper about there's a fraction bar, and it's a horizontal bar, 5 strips, vertical strips. The question is, what fraction is it? And the first 3 are shaded. And so you say, it's 3/5. It could also be 2/5. But depending on what you call the whole, it could be a whole range of other fractions as well. Could be 1 whole and 2/3 of that first whole, and there's various other ones. And again, it's how you seeing this, because a learner might see it a different way to me. And if that's the case, then I need to be interested in how they're seeing it, so I can take them on the journey that they need to be on.
I really love the ship example he gives about.
Oh yeah, it's great.
It's great. So he asks the people, how do you get the ship from B to? What would you say to the ship to get it from B to C? And the pupil says, "Ready, steady, go."
Yeah, it's. I think it's that. I think what I'm hearing from both of those things is about that active listening, isn't it? Is that, and I think a lot of the kind of current research, I suppose, or information around oracy in classrooms is around being an active listener as well. And I think it's interesting how you can be looking for a specific answer, and if someone says ready, steady, go instead of whatever it is they actually want, whether it's directional or numbers or whatever, it's that why, rather than just dismissing that response, it's about thinking, well, why has the child said ready, steady, go? What is going on there? And engaging in that discussion and unpicking that a little bit more.
Yeah, interesting.
Play devil's advocate. What was the difference between, say, doing a discussion and getting the children to write something down on a mini whiteboard in silence and hold it up? Are we arguably getting as much insight into their thinking through a mini whiteboard as we are from listening to a discussion? Or what does the mini, I guess my question is, what does the mini whiteboard not do that the talk does do?
I think for me in primary, I think from a pupil perspective, I think a lot of my pupils are happier to talk than they are to write. So I feel like talking for them feels more informal, and I think they're more likely to use colloquial phrases or language, like a roundabout way of talking about something, which shows me they understand the concept, but they might not necessarily be using mathematical vocabulary. Whereas I think if I ask them to write stuff down, they feel suddenly that they have to then be concise, be use mathematical vocabulary. And so therefore they might, what I get out of that, reading that, is perhaps not as helpful, I suppose, as listening to them go around the houses a bit, but understand where they're coming from.
So it takes away the exploration part.
I think so, but I think that's because I don't know whether that's because there's the kind of thing around, like a thing in pupils around talk versus writing and the formality aspect of it. I mean, that just might be my experience with little children, but you know.
No, I think it's the same.
Yeah. I don't know if in secondary, in some classrooms, actually it works the other way around, and they would rather write something that feels safer than having a conversation. I don't know. I think it often depends on how the question is framed. And I'm a big fan of actually not doing one or the other, both. So they'll have a conversation and then collectively agree on something to write. And that can, they've got a focus to write them down, but they've had a conversation well, because talking involves hearing someone else's thoughts and hearing their perspective, and that can be quite important.
Yeah, I agree. Were there any other sort of things that stand out in either article that anybody wants to mention? I feel like we've gone through a lot of the key points.
I was just interested in Mike Askew, 4 things that you need to think about as a teacher, and the third one was the tools to tackle the maths. And I guess I was just wondering, what are the tools that would help you tackle the maths in the Jane Hawkins article? So is it diagrams? Is it double number lines? How do we plan those into the talk task? I don't know if anybody else has got any other thoughts on that. No, that's a no.
I hadn't thought about that, but it's a good question. I think for me, her article was actually what the tools will be. What questions would you? Because you've got these 2 examples with the cookies. One's make 8, one's make 13 with original 4, and the question is, how do you frame that? I think the tools are very much how you frame that to pupils. How do you actually phrase the question that's going to prompt that conversation? And to me, I think that often needs more thought than you think.
Maybe actually, I've just gone back to Mike Askew's article and read what he says about tools, and he said these could simply be symbols and diagrams, which is maybe what we were just talking about with the mini whiteboards.
Yeah, definitely. And for me, in terms of the first paragraph in Jane's article, just going back to Lisa's question about anything else stood out for you, I think is just quite interesting, and perhaps why we're doing this podcast, having this conversation, really. I'll read that first paragraph, it's quite nice. So my year 11s were in Middlesex. When they left, the results were okay, but I was painfully aware they hadn't learned things I thought I'd taught them. Mathematics didn't make sense for them, and their learning didn't make sense to me. And during lessons, students could do the thing I taught them to do, then a week, 1 month later, they weren't able to apply it. And this idea that I think a lot of teachers experience this. I think they have this frustration all of the time as maths teachers, that they think pupils get things and they don't seem to. And pupils don't seem to. There's this disconnect. And obviously, talk has been a big part of that we've talked about today. But I think that's often there in the background. And the solutions aren't simple. They're complex, because learning is complex. And so for me, that's an important paragraph. It kind of says to me why we're sort of starting this podcast, really, because talking about these things is critical as educators as well. And so for me, that's quite an interesting sort of frame for what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, it's one of those, if we can ask that question, then we'd have a very successful podcast. I think it's going to take us a while to unpick it. I think that is probably, sorry, Elizabeth.
Episode 4, I'm feeling optimistic.
Episode 4, okay, great. Tune in to episode 4. I think that's a really good place to kind of end the conversation, because it's a nice place to springboard off for next time. Just thinking about anything else people could read. So Elizabeth, you mentioned Dave Hewitt's Arbitrary and Necessary. Would that be a useful thing for people to read off the back of these 2 articles?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an MT Journal article as well.
Great. I'd really recommend Askew's work, particularly Transforming Primary Mathematics, which is a book which kind of starts to think about a lot of these ideas and really sort of moves the kind of thinking from this 1999 article forward. So I'd recommend that as well. Jay, anything to add?
I was going to say, I think Dave Hewitt's article, I think, is actually in For the Learning of Mathematics,
Oh.
but it is available online, I think, in various places.
Great. So hopefully you've enjoyed this episode of MT Talk. If you have enjoyed it, then please do share it with your colleagues, share it on socials, and you can also get in touch with us via our website, which is mttalk.co.uk.
Wonderful. Look forward to next time.